So each of you come to this work from a different community and vantage point. So tell us a bit about how does that position shape not just what you've witnessed, but how you personally experience and make sense of hate. Maybe I'll go to Tyler first.
Sure, thank you. So for me, being Two-Spirit First Nation, growing up in my small community my whole life, it's important for me to tell people and understand that I was never made to feel different within my own community, within my own First Nation. I've always been proud of who I am, and I've worn makeup since I was 13 years old. My cookums, my mushums, my family and my relatives, they've never made me feel less than in my community. I moved away from my post-secondary education at the age of 17, and that was really the first time that I learned something was wrong about me. And they came from, I would say, systems of society, colonialism, Christianity that was forced onto my people through residential school, 60 scoop, all these colonial tools that really changed the idea of who we are and what is considered normal. The government systems that oppress my people, the Indian Act, media, politics. It's really the outside world that told me I wasn't per se normal. But in our Nahia way, our Cree way, our Two-Spirit people have always existed. And I introduced my spirit name to all of you, and again, that was Two Eagle Warrior. And the Kete member, the helpers who had given me my spirit name, two meaning the two spirits that I carry. Eagle because they inform me you see things from a different perspective. And a warrior, you're not scared to be yourself. You're out there advocating for your people. And so that name really meant a lot to me, getting that within ceremony for my Kadeyak. And that teaching and those teachings that I received have been inclusive. The space I'm in and the community I'm in is loving. I would say we recognize spirit and who we are from our inherent rights given to us from Creator. This is who I was born to be, rather than living and thinking about gender in a binary. So when I think about hate, I don't think about people necessarily saying slurs. Um, though it's a issue, I do think about systems that spend time and generations telling people they're abnormal or they're sinful or dangerous or less deserving of safety. And for our First Nations people, we know exactly what that's like because Canada for us created laws to control who we could be. You know, our ceremonies were banned. The Indian Act controlled Indian residential schools, killed the Indian and the child. We were punished for speaking our language. They forced our young kids into residential school. I'm the first person from my family who hasn't been to residential school. My mom, my dad, my cookums, my mushums, my great great grandmother, they've all went. And so when you grow up in these systems that try to erase our identity and constantly try regulate who we are and begin internalizing the idea that difference is something to fear rather than something sacred. I think that's why this conversation matters to me personally and why I want to speak to it because I know what it feels like to belong at home, but feel unsafe in broader society. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm seeing some support coming in from the reactions from the attendees as well. Templeton, can you share some of your experience from your vantage point?
I think for me, when I wrote down some notes, but I think kind of sharing a bit of my kind of immigrant story coming into Canada. Now I think because I work with employers, community leaders, newcomers and stuff like that, I feel more kind of alert and aware of the hate that kind of surrounds me. But I feel for me, I had to be more kind of silent and not address certain things because I'm a Black man, I'm gay, I'm a part of the community, and I feel that talking about who I was and being proud to be a Black gay man was kind of an isolating thing for me where I wasn't able to kind of share that. I grew up in a home of Christian parents and Christian values. And so I think that that also kind of played a role on how I showed up in society. And it wasn't until maybe 2018 when I had to kind of change that narrative for myself because I started working in the employment sector. And I realized that no one was talking about supporting 2SLGBTQIA plus folks in Nova Scotia. I was working in for an employment center, and I said, you know what? I need to speak up about this. And I took the opportunity to kind of address it with the employer, and they actually were open. They gave us the opportunity to do more trainings around this. And I feel like that's when I got to also understand that people will still question you about your values, and they think they will make assumptions about who you are because you now are advocating for these issues around gay rights and stuff like that. And I feel like people then change the narrative, and I'm like, no, I'm still Templeton. I'm still the same person. I'm just expressing who I am and my identity around this area. And I think that that's something that gets questioned on who gets access to these opportunities, who gets to believe in you when in certain ways. And so I feel like that's something that I've always questioned, especially doing hiring practices on oh, should I tick the box to say I'm a part of the 2SLGBTQI community? Am I going to be questioned around that? And I think that that's something that I want to kind of break that barrier. Even though employers are being kind of inclusive in that area, I feel like that's also sometimes kind of that mindset of okay, what is society thinking? Because sometimes employers they follow their faith and they follow their practices when they're hiring versus looking at actually putting the right people in the role. And so, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Simpson. And that's definitely something that we see. There's always a lag between what's actually legislated and what's actually put in practice and what people believe. Jasmine, I'll go to you next.
Thanks so much. I think hate has actually shaped a lot of my transition. When I first started transitioning, one of the things my bio mom, as grateful as I am that she was so supportive of it, it was just that she was so deeply worried that once I transitioned, I would experience hate in my day-to-day life. When I would get on the subway, when I would be going down the street to get some food, she was just so petrified. And even within my own community of trans sisters, safety is fueled. You're worried about your safety because of that hate, because you can be hate crime down the street, and you worry about will will society come to my support, or is it because I'm trans they won't show up for me, and I'll have to fend for myself. And so these last 6 years, it's shaped my identity. It's shaped how I present in the world, because you learn to fear that hate so much because you related to being unsafe or being in positions of where folks won't show up for you. And I think now, with what we're seeing in the media of how society is responding to trans hate, it almost validates that in a way that, like, yeah, you are now more at risk. And I think that also still continues to influence how I navigate the world as a trans woman of color.
Thank you. Yeah, you all touched a little bit on that systemic, that less visible hate, right? So let's dive into that a little bit because it doesn't always look like a slur or an attack, right? So what are some of the quieter, more structural forms of hate that you see? The ones that really make the headlines, but really do real damage to people and communities. Sambat, I'll go to you from the employment view.
I think I look at, like I said, the hiring practices are definitely the ways of being excluded. I think when coming to moving to Ontario, I can look at those areas of, oh, I had the career development experience in Nova Scotia, but didn't have the career development experience in Ontario, was kind of like overlooked for those kind of areas. And also Like I mentioned earlier, I had this conversation with my partner. I think, oh, should I tick that I'm a black man? Should I tick that so I'm questioning my own identity and seeing, do I actually like want this opportunity to fit in, or do I want this opportunity to kind of be a part and contribute with my identity and being comfortable on who I am and stuff like that. And so I questioned that, but now I'm fully gay and I am proud to be it, and I will put it. I will check the box, and I don't feel upset. If you don't want me at the organization, then that's on you, boo. Like you keep that there, and I will stay here. I feel like that's the mentality. But some people, it takes a while. It takes a while in that confidence area where people don't want to show up, and they kind of dream themselves into those assumption making and stuff like that. And so I feel like we have to get rid of all those negative thinking of people, of what type of person we want at the organization, who we want them to look like. Do we want them to be brown? Do we want them to be white? Do we want them to be Asian? No, we want them to be human. We actually want them to be the experience that are existing and kind of creating change. That's what we want. Don't look at their gender. Don't look at their culture. Look at who they are and what they can bring. Their live experiences bring a lot. For sure as well. And so looking at those aspects is important. I feel like just looking at humans. So anyway, I could talk about this all day, but I think I'll turn it over to the next panelist. Yeah.
No, you're so right, because there's like this conflict of you want people to bring their authentic self to work, but at the same time you want them to fit. And so what does fit mean? Like it means like trying to conform to a dominant culture. That's not bringing your authentic self, right? Tyler, can you share a bit about the systemic, less visible hate?
Sure. I think that for me, when I'm thinking about, the quieter attacks on our people is mainly about seeing issues like underfunding happen, seeing departments that are created to protect two-spirit and gender diverse people being slashed. It looks like being ignored by systems sometimes, even where governments are introducing legislation without hearing from the people. And then it gets, a bit of backlash. But debating whether certain young people deserve protection or dignity is a big issue. And for, as a two-spirit person, hate can look like being made invisible, where we're told we don't have rights. And I even think about how statistics are captured. Statistics not even asking, is this person gender diverse? It's always like male or female. And you know, that's where I think about missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and two-spirit and gender diverse people. Are we actually capturing those who are gender diverse, who are being attacked and harmed, or is this just a way for, government to continue on the path of the binary? And again, I just think about, as a First Nations person living in this system that has historically been written directly into law for us, the Indian Act, as I mentioned, controlling our movement if we could leave the reserve, having control over identity. Who's Indian? We get Indian status, and that comes from government legislation. Can we practice our ceremony? Being from Kakisalo, Chapways, I can tell you that my chief was removed from being chief for going to ceremony. We didn't have a chief for 30 years. And that was because government wanted to control who we were, what we did, and how we represented ourselves. And so it's like these residential schools and these systems that have taught many of our generations that our spirituality, that our language and our way of life was wrong. It The damage doesn't disappear overnight. We have intergenerational trauma we want to look at, intergenerationally healing, but this hurt and this trauma, it feels like, is ingrained into our DNA now. And so quieter forms of hate are the systems, to me, that make people feel like they're tolerated instead of actually being valued. So thank you.
Yeah, and when you think about, what's not being funded, especially as priorities of the government shift, like that erasure itself is a system, right? And that form of hate is being more and more pervasive. Jasmine, do you have any pieces to share on this?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of my work intersects with being a public figure and getting to speak on my trans experience. But I've found over the years, it feels so tokenized. It feels very, when brands and companies need it for their beneficial gain to boost their visibility, to boost their participation in community. And we see it happen all the time for Pride, and not happening when, there are politicians speaking about our community or excluding us or speaking down on us. We don't have those brands and those companies who extract from us come forward to stand up for us. They come around when it's very convenient. And that to me has always felt like a form of silent hate, because you're not valuing us as humans, as a community, as people who are fighting for our lives. You're valuing us as an item that can be used to your benefit.
Yeah, no, and that's what we're seeing a lot in Alberta in the US, like, using our identities as scapegoats for political gain, you know. Um, but I mentioned with the reporting and then the little slide deck that I went through before that a lot of um, people of color don't even report the cases, right? So, like, when someone experiences hate, whether it's a threat or a pattern or a crisis, what gets in the way of them being able to seek help? What gets in the way of them reporting it or even naming it? Um, and what does that look like differently depending on how or who that person is? Um, Maybe I'll jump to Jasmine again.
I mean, from my experience in working alongside community, working alongside a lot of trans people of color and a lot of Black trans women as well, it's just that the the law enforcement and police obviously doesn't feel like a safe system that you can go to begin with. That you feel like, uh, you know, through history has respected our community or our people. But then, for the folks that I have witnessed that have tried to go through the system, it's like there's no follow up. There's nobody that is, supporting them with that process of trying to get justice or trying to get support or access to care. It takes somebody to have that self initiative during that trauma, during all that pain, to still have to go through and fight for themselves in that way. And I think when you're in that moment and you're thinking like, well, do I care for myself or do I have to go fight with, the system who already doesn't show up for me to try and get justice? It's like, well, I'd rather just try and show up for myself and take care of myself in this moment. Like I can't even get to there. And even when you do have community support rallying for you to get the justice you deserve, you could have 5 people, and there still have been so many instances where folks are not heard, or taken seriously. And I'm sure many of the other panelists have experiences that they can attest to that as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And a lot of times people like think of barriers as something individual, but it's actually systemic barriers that's preventing people from actually reporting. Templeton?
Sorry, there's something that just came up. I think I talk about that systemic barrier, and I think that when we report, I think we think that sometimes it leads to meaningful action, but it doesn't lead to meaningful action. Like what does action mean to you? Like it's actually just words. And I think that that's why people don't trust people, because they can just say things just for a beautiful speech or for a beautiful kind of orchestra just to hear themselves, but it's not actually kind of a recipe that's going to kind of action forward. And I'm an action person. I tend to look at people and I know when they're fooling around and they're not going to do anything. So if someone's not doing nothing, I kind of move along and find a different system or create that system that's going to kind of create the change. And so I kind of focus on the change because I know society has been proven that a lot of leaders who are kind of like are in sometimes in political and holding political spaces, or just sometimes people of influence, sometimes they're there for the pay, they're there just to share their own individual voice, and sometimes they're just there just to be authoritative. And so for newcomers especially, they look at kind of those layers where their language is a barrier. They're not able to speak like the language that folks or employers may want them to speak. Their immigration status, there's no pathway to support them, and immigration is changing. It's a reality right now. And I feel like because there are so many policies that are kind of shifting immigration, there's a lot of fears from employers. There's a lot of fears from employers who don't even know how to support them. There's fears from newcomers who don't know how to actually show up or apply and don't even know where their status is going to go. Fear of authority, fear of being deported, and fear of all of that, and maybe simply not knowing where to go, where to belong or where to fit them in. It's kind of sad, honestly. I was actually one. I there was actually I think it was 2 months ago. I was coming from the airport and I was in my Uber, and this young man, and he was telling me, he said, like, Templeton, I live I'm from a different country, which is so beautiful, very, very bright, very kind. But I came to Canada to look for a beautiful, better life for myself. And I've decided that I'm going to leave this country because I don't belong. And I feel like I'm just a machine that's just working day in, day out, and don't have my community there with me to support me. And so sometimes, especially when you're in bigger cities as Ontario, you don't get to find your community as much as you want to, and being able to build those trust within that community. I feel for me, living in Nova Scotia, living in Prince Edward Island, I got to actually sit in and lean into those communities because it's much more smaller and you get to find those ways. But sometimes it's hard to build trust in bigger cities and being able to see that in those areas. And so there's so many layers in those areas. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Sandy. Tyler?
Thank you. I think about people not wanting to report hate or mistreatment because there's often times where they're not believed. When I'm thinking about our history as Indigenous people, as Two-Spirit people, I would say we have a lot of distrust over organizations not taking us seriously because those institutions have harmed us for too long, like the RCMP, police, the child welfare system, schools, churches, and many of our communities have intergenerational experiences of not being protected. And sometimes I think people um, are afraid of reporting because it would make things worse. Maybe a fear of retaliation and judgment, or even becoming a further target. I think some people don't um, have language for what they've experienced because discrimination seems to have been so normalized now. And when I say normalized, I'm thinking about our young people, our youth, our Wiskayak that are coming up, growing up, if they're in an environment where they're constantly hearing jokes and comments or seeing online hate and political debates about whether people deserve rights, I think eventually our young people start to believe that they just have to endure it. And I think that can be really dangerous. And we talk about needing to create these safe spaces and these culturally safe spaces where and that's needed so our people can speak openly and feel like they're taken serious and believed. So thank you.
I just want
Yeah,
to,
go ahead,
sorry,
please.
I just feel like Tyler, you explained it so well, and I'm really grateful for that because you're reminding me that it, like, to simplify it, I just feel like many of the trans women in my community would laugh at the idea at reporting it because it just feels like something for generations after generations is just not accessible to our community. Like, we don't even believe that that is an option for us to report a hate crime, and that goes back so many decades. And to Tyler's point, right? Like you added an indigenous lens, you added a trans lens. Like it just for generation after generation, we just have not had access to that as a service. And it feels like that is a generational experience across the country.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's the intersectional nuance, right? About having these intersecting identities from marginalized communities. You know, that distrust of authority of police, especially for Indigenous and trans people, like the fear of outing, right, in certain systems as well. But Templeton, you talked a little bit about that, you know, chosen family and that sense of belonging that you can get from that. So maybe you can share a bit about some of the overlooked impacts. You know, so we often talk about immediate harm of a hateful incident. So, like, what are some of the longer term, less visible consequences, like on health or belonging or, you know, safety seeking behavior that you don't necessarily get acknowledged sometimes?
Yeah, I think that those effects, such as mental health and being able to feel confident in yourself. I remember when I moved to Toronto in 2023, I went through a mental breakdown. I had a moment where I didn't know where I was going, who to connect to. Um, People are sticking to themselves and everything, and so I isolated myself in that way where I say, okay, I'm just gonna try to find community, but then I kept like speaking, did I make the right decision? And it got me in a 1 year of mental breakdown. Honestly, I shut down. I was not like kind of like wanting to do much projects that I was doing. And I wrote like these notes to myself, kind of about a mind learning to breathe, and kind of giving my mind that clarity of wanting to know how to get out there and put myself, because I'm a big person with a big personality, and so kind of utilizing that was like really important, and knowing that spaces like Center for Social Innovation was one of those like spaces that created that awareness for me in Toronto. And because of Center for Social Innovation, I kind of like branched out, and that's how I got to find Pride of Canada, and that's how I kind of like lean into my like that trust in the community, and then kind of getting more involved, and now being a part of other 2SLGBTQIA plus communities where I get to advocate more. Joining the board of It Gets Better Canada, and being a part of those advocacies for young people and kind of raising those awareness so it doesn't happen to other folks where they feel isolated in those areas. And so yeah, it takes time to find who you can trust. It goes back to that trust piece, to be able to find your chosen family and chosen people around you. And I feel like it took a while for me, because of just the city I was living in, and being able to connect more. So yeah.
Thanks, Templeton. Jasmine, Tyler, any thoughts on some of those overlooked impacts?
I think for me, I really think about how uh exhausting it can feel to constantly be assessing our safety.
Mm,
It does take a toll on us. I think about you know, if we're walking into a room, having to think, am I safe here? I recently had to travel to another country for work because I was on a task force talking on Indigenous issues, and two-spirit gender diverse people are often targeted there. And it
mm,
made me very fearful of my safety. And when we think about the world changing, there's still parts of this world where we can't be who we are. And so I think constantly having to keep that in the backs of our mind, like, can I hold up my partner's hand here? Can I speak my language here? Can I wear this and can I wear my makeup and be myself here? As a true spirit leader, a young leader, I'm often asking myself that, am I welcomed at the table? And I think stress, when you're constantly having to question yourself, it really does impact our mental health, our self-worth, our identity and our belonging. And I think about that intergenerational trauma that came from the colonial systems already. And so when you start to add racism, transphobia, homophobia, and gender-based violence on top of all of it, it really does compound and impact our health. I think that's when we start to see things like, the high suicide rates and addictions in our communities and homelessness and violence, mental health struggles, not because our people are weak, but because I think many of us have spent generations being told we're less valuable. And that system that's been created really has to change, because we want our people to live miopamatsuin, a good life, a healthy life. And so my hope is that we really start to see changes, not just for us, but for our future generations. So thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and like Jasmine was saying earlier, some of these trans folks or indigenous folks or Black queer immigrants, right? It becomes intrinsic that you have to navigate safety. The compounding effects of the lateral violence and the colonial trauma is just something you have to accept when you embrace those identities, right? Jasmine, do you want to share a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I just think about the trans, gender diverse, and two-spirit youth who are seeing all of this hate online and seeing it so normalized and seeing it almost supported and backed over and over and over again. And I work with youth of every age, and many queer youth, and they tell me all the time how fearful they are to come out, how fearful they are, how they feel like they have to wait years and years. Imagine being 6, 7 years old and and I've had, kids tell me I won't be able to live my life until I'm 18. And that feels so far away. Like I don't feel like I can be myself. And like Tyler was saying, you get that's a long time that you're going to suffer with your mental health. Thoughts of suicide come out simply because that hate in society traps you in this fear of not being able to be yourself, not being able to put yourself out there or to pursue what you feel like is truly who you are. Um, and yeah, I worry so much, again, like Tyler was saying, that intergenerational, it just, that passes down, those fears pass down, those ideas pass down, you share them with your peers. And I worry that we've gone too far, right? And that like younger and younger generations are going to keep continuously hiding their identity, continue this rhetoric that they have to wait with their identity when it feels like
Mm.
we're just going so many steps backwards. Like it had felt at some point that maybe we were getting closer to where folks feel comfortable coming forward with that, whereas now we're pushing people back into the closet.
Mm. So maybe let's pivot a little bit because we're talking a little bit about that distrust in institutions, those formal institutions, police and hospitals and government programs and so on. Let's look a little bit at community-based support, right? Because those other institutions often fall short or cause additional harm. But what does actually meaningful support look like when it comes from within community? And what's required to make it sustainable? Tyler?
I think for me, when we're looking at support and really helping our young people to ensure we're showing them that they're safe within community, it really does come from us reclaiming responsibilities for one another. I think support means creating spaces where people can feel safe every day. Um, for speaking on my experience as First Nation and within our nation, that to me is looking at reconnecting to our ceremonies, our language, our identity, um, our teachings. And again, as I said before colonization, our nation had roles for our Two-Spirit people. And before I was even in leadership, we had, I'm just going to acknowledge Chief Margaret Bear. She's retired from leadership now, but back when she was a leader, she asked our community, what can we do to make people feel safer? What can we do to make an inclusive, diverse nation? And so what they did, the leadership back then, is they created gender neutral bathrooms right on our First Nation school for our Two-Spirit and gender diverse people. Our school, we have a Two-Spirit scholarship for grade 12 students to start that conversation of what safety looks like. We raised the pride flag with it at our school, at our community center. It's part of our Eagle staff where we carry in our flags at every powwow, at every celebration. That pride flag that has Kakisuo Chapwes written on it. We're showing our people that we're proud of you and you belong here. And I just want to even share that back in, I believe it was 2022. Our First Nation was the first ever First Nation that participated in the Queen City Pride Parade. We had Chief Margaret at that time and Chief Cadmus leading it with our elders, our youth, the kids from our school, where we went and showed our citizens living in urban centers that home is safe for you. And now, when we participated just this previous year, last year, there were 8 First Nations that entered into the Pride Parade because these conversations are happening. We see things like the Assembly of First Nations that I talked about, you know, opening spaces. It's our First Nation communities who voted unanimously to create a national Two-Spirit Council. In Saskatchewan, we have what's called the Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations, FSIN. We worked on a resolution to have a full-time Two-Spirit youth chief position. We passed that resolution. We have that now within our governance system. And so I think for me, healing really requires us returning to our teachings because once we show that, again, that we're decolonizing and taking back what we had and showing it to the rest of society, it really matters. And I think further, it does require, you know, outside resources and supports and housing and cultural programming, Gadeak, Gadeak guidance, elder guidance, because though we can use own source revenue to do all these things for ourselves, I do think that communities can't keep being expected to heal people while constantly being underfunded to serve their people. So thank you.
Jasmine?
I think action. I say this as a reminder that we talk too much and we don't see the action from folks who are in these positions of power and they hold like these positions. And I always try to remind people who are doing community work that we're not serving our funders, we're serving the people that actually need to be served. And so being aware of that is kind of that awareness piece to understand the realities and the hurdles in knowing who we're serving is really important. And that connection piece is like a really important piece to kind of understand how can we intentionally build within these communities that we're serving, especially within the newcomer community. We're doing like this belonging tour that a Lifehouse started, and we kind of it stemmed out of back in 2024 where we saw that there were a lot of international students blamed for the housing crisis, and there were a lot of refugees sleeping on the streets of Toronto. And so for Lifehouse, we saw that there was a need and a wake up call for us to wake up and alarm ourselves to kind of bring community together, employers, policy makers, politicians themselves, and kind of unpack how do we kind of work together and not do it in silos. And so this is our second tour. Last year we went to Halifax. We convened some amazing folks. We went to Calgary, Alberta, and then we had one in Toronto in partnership with Covenant House. And this year we're returning back to Calgary because Calgary really needs some love for immigration and newcomers right now. And so we want to be able to build those connections where employers can understand how to navigate these systems that are sometimes very fearful, and sometimes they don't know how to respond to these issues. And so that's what we're doing at a Life House, and kind of bringing those ways and kind of transforming those systems is definitely important. But we can't transform it just one person. We have to bring a collective type of collaborative approach. Is really important. I think that that's something, especially in EDI, DEI work. I think that it's been a weaponizing tool, and I think that a lot of people are kind of knowing how can we kind of work together now that people are defunding these initiatives and taking away all the skill programs that are supporting these communities. How can we kind of build together? And I just had a conversation with someone from another organization this morning, and we're looking at building a community of practice to bring together these persons and decision makers who are kind of building these EDI and work for a community. So yeah, it takes action. It takes action to move forward. Not just it takes time, but in recognizing it. But if we're doing our little part, it'll go a long way for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, moving beyond the performance and actually moving into investment and coalition building. Jasmine, what are your thoughts?
Just clarifying, the question was how can community continue to show up?
Yeah, what is some
Community
community-based
support.
support? What meaningful support look like for community?
Yeah, the way that we do it in ballroom is a mixture of safe spaces. That's what the balls are for, right? For youth to come forward and to have a space that is safe, celebrated, and protected by their elders. But outside of just that celebration of your identity, you also have chosen family that is there for the hardest of times. And I think that's what builds resilience, is when community is there in the thick of those moments, right? Like if you need access to food, if you're going through a gender affirming surgery, you have that chosen family that shows up for you in those vital moments. Or if you're dealing with hate, you have a band of people come forward to sort of mourn and grieve with you and to deal with the frustrations of that. I think that's how I've survived so much of my transition, was having people with those lived experiences genuinely want to be there for you in those hard moments. And also learning over time that you also have to let your community show up for you. I think a lot of the times we try to navigate things on our own, and sometimes that actually becomes a disservice to your community when you don't let them show up for you, because those people are there and they want to be with you and they can relate to you. And so, yeah, just as I get older, along my journey, like that's the position I want to place myself in, where I can be an elder that can be like, yeah, everyone come to my house. I'm going to make dinner tonight, or somebody in the community passed. Let's mourn them together. Those are the kind of ways that we continue to build resiliency.
Amazing. Yeah, I want to dive a little deeper into some of these solutions, but I want to invite the attendees as well to use the Q&A to ask any questions. We're just going to have two more questions from my side, then we'll open up the floor to the Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please use that feature. So thinking about some of these community-based supports and so on, what interventions, approaches, or community responses have actually worked, or like, well, what have you seen actually interrupt or reduce hate, right? Especially for those of us who hold multiple marginalized identities. Um, what I'm trying to get at is what made those work where other things didn't work, right? If you can make some distinctions there. Maybe Templeton?
I think for the belonging tour, I'll touch base on what we've done. I think that co-collaboration and co-creation is a really important piece, and I think collaboration's at the heart. Kind of that cross-sector collaboration is really important, and knowing that a lighthouse is just the architect and designing the space, but when it comes down to like the content and the context and kind of reframing that messaging, that's where we bring those local community experts in the room and kind of bringing those different experiences and lived identities into the spaces. And that's where we've become more accessible. People want to say, oh, my friend Heather is actually going to be a part of this panel, or I want to champion and I want to support. And I feel like people get to support and create with others when they see who's in the room, because who's kind of creating that for them. And so I think it's more being building that awareness around collaborating with those local leaders has definitely worked for us in building that approach. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Tyler.
I think what we've seen actually start to work is the relationships that we create, but also the representation that we have. I think about, our young people needing to see more people who look like them, um, surviving and leading and speaking publicly and fully being accepted. I just think about the young kids, in our schools that need representation because even I'm not going to say that First Nation communities or Indigenous communities or the societies are safe for people like me and like us. For the reality is I'm seeing a lot of First Nations people having to migrate and move to bigger cities to be safe or to feel safe. Uh,
Mm.
I want young people to grow up in a world where they do see, a two-spirit leader and someone who wears makeup and hearing our elders, our G'day actually tell them in ceremony that you have space here. Because that to me, that really changes how our young people see themselves. And when that the work is that we need to be moving beyond just tolerating and looking at belonging because honestly I think accountability is a big thing that people don't take serious. Harmful behavior can't just be excused as opinions anymore. It's leaders, it's institutions, it's our schools, our governments that have true responsibility to create safety for all of our people to live safe and in dignity and feel protected. So thank you.
Absolutely. I'm thinking from Templeton, their action, right? Representation, allyship, advocacy, visibility, leadership, right? All of these pieces would really help us get there. Jasmine?
Um, I just, in my past experience, we've lost so many young trans women to violence and to hate, especially within the ballroom community. And something that has worked is just us showing up together, in a bit of public outrage and really saying enough is enough, online and in person, that these lives are just equally as valued as any other human lives, and they should not be overlooked simply because of their identity or dismissed or passed off, and the life expectancy cannot be this short. And I think it takes that level of knowledge. But when you mourn like that as a community, we've seen that we're stronger together. And when you have that sort of shared response, it often gets things done. We often can have that person's name remembered. We often can have folks look at us a little differently.
So I'm going to ask one closing question, and then I'll take a look at the Q&A there. But if there's one thing you can change about how we talk about hate, how we respond to it, or resource communities most affected by it, what would it be? What do you want people walking out of the panel today to understand or do differently? Anyone can kick us off.
I think about the word Ubuntu, which means I am because we are, and I think that we have to learn the power of togetherness as we continue to do this work. It's really important, and like I said, that action definitely. There's a quote that I always say: if your actions inspire others to do more, to dream more, and to become more, then you're doing leadership. And so I think that that's something that I kind of live by in my personal kind of anthem, and kind of wanting to echo that to others, to allow your actions to inspire others to want to do more, and not just look at the words. I think that that's really important. Yep.
Shay. Tyler?
I think if I could change something, I to me it would be the way we talk about identity as if it's something up for a debate. I think about, like Templeton was talking, having space and relationships, kindness with everyone in our Nahia way. We have what are referred to as natural laws. We have to live by them, and that's Wakutuin, kinship with all living things. Everything belongs, we all belong. That's where Creator, made us to be who we are. And I'm tired of feeling like people's identity and humanity is political because it shouldn't be.
Mm.
Um, as a First Nation person, I think I've seen what happens when governments and institutions start deciding and debating who is acceptable and who is not. We lived through that. My cookums, my mushums, my relatives have lived through that. And I want to leave, I guess, people understanding, as I mentioned, our inherent rights. Those are connected with human rights. Our inherent rights are everything that Kitsi Manitou Creator gave us when we were born. The right to our language, our identity, our spirit, our ceremony, our belonging in our spaces. I think that if we truly respected inherent rights, we would respect human rights too. And I want our young people, especially Indigenous Two-Spirit marginalized people, to know this clearly, is that there's nothing wrong with who you are because Creator made you exactly the way you were supposed to be. And we need to understand that we all belong here, and we always have and we always will. So, yeah.
French. Jasmine?
That was really beautiful, Kyla. Thank you for saying that. I think when I look at the trans hate in the media and online, I think there's so much misunderstanding of trans people. And I wish I could change that. Just trans people, being trans is just a small part of our identity. We want to have jobs, we want to have fruitful lives and hobbies, and friends and community and have a family, and build a life that is of substance far more than just our gender identity. And it's not about pushing that on to anybody else or to youth. We just want to have equal access to opportunities like any other cis person. And we're not trying to erase cis people. We're not trying to take away from them. We just want to coexist like any other human would. And it feels like, as easy that is to say out loud and to understand for folks in this chat, it just feels like that there's such a huge misunderstanding with that.
We have one question from the Q&A here so far. I think there's some others coming in. Beyond corporate funding, and anyone can jump in with an answer, what does meaningful partnership look like to you? How can my company best serve diverse and intersectional identities?
I can jump in. I think support all year round is really important. I think more than just doing it during Pride months or special days, show that it's an active thing that your company or organization is committed to. And I think also how you show up for even just your employees, in that, like your queer and trans and two-spirited employees in that sense, I think attest to that and bring that into your partnerships, right? If you do it I always say this with anywhere that I work, um, how you show up for your employees is going to be a testimony to like what your work is also outside in community as well. And so I think that it should reflect pretty clearly.
And I maybe just want to take a shot at it because I think about um, when we're building meaningful partnerships and relationships that also looks at ensuring that the voices and the lived experiences are actually a part of organizations or in those partnerships. As Kakiso Chapwis, what we've done is we've updated all of our policies to have gender neutral language. To, though it's a simple thing, it's meaningful. We're ensuring that identity is inclusive within our First Nation community even. And when we want to talk about safety and safe spaces, it's not just, a one-time thing and symbolism and I think that we have to make meaningful change where, you know, we're not feeling like we're being studied or acknowledged for a month and still left being underfunded and discriminated against. I think that if organizations, governments truly want partnership, then resources have to be given and decision-making power has to be given and accountability has to follow the words that are being said. And so um I think that institutions need to be, organizations, government need to be willing to change, not just listen and do nothing. So thank you.
Absolutely. Have anything to add there, Templeton? All right.
Yeah, I think you both said it all. I think being able to have like those values, I think value-driven kind of values on how you're partnering and understanding those values and kind of clearly stating like where you want to move forward. And like Tyler said, like that accountability holder is really important on how you're showing up and how you're intentionally leading that partnership in creating those awareness is definitely an important piece. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to jump on that word intention. That's so important because that whole principle of nothing about us without us is really how you can show up in partnership, right? You don't bring people in after you've done your done your business. You want to bring them in early in the planning stage, in the formation, and throughout the execution and feedback. So really incorporating that allyship from the beginning with intention. Um, so that's some of the questions coming in. Thank you, everyone. So can you share where asexual and demisexual folks belong as it feels invisible in definitions? Okay. Can you share where asexual and demisexual folks belong as it feels invisible in definitions? Any thoughts there? Made it a difficult one.
I can take a stab. I think a lot of the time, at least with my work at Sherburne, we try to do programming that is specific for like the intersections of the community. And I think that there are lots of organizations, at least to my knowledge, within the city of Toronto, that do try and do weekly programming in the evenings for those intersections that you're mentioning. But I definitely hear that. I think that they're, oftentimes the queer community might be painted as a picture that can be very accepting or that is a one sort of spot safe space for all. And there's oftentimes intersections that get left out of that conversation or in those spaces. And I think whether that's trying to find them on your own or carving them out is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite the challenge to find community, right? And so it's about staying open and connecting to the different organizations. Thinking about women's safety spaces, and in particular, response to intimate partner violence and gender-based violence, I feel there can be sometimes a reluctance to make these spaces inclusive of trans, gender diverse, and two-spirit individuals. So this attendee is curious if the panel has any thoughts on combating situations like that where resources may be closed or less open to queer community. Yeah, that's so thinking about those spaces that may be sometimes exclusive to trans and gender diverse spaces because of their work, whether it's intimate partner violence or women's safety. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I just think about you know, right off the bat wanting to talk about um the threats that we do all feel being gender diverse and two-spirit. We're not trying to invade spaces where, they may be specific to a group. I think about the conversation about MMIWG. There was discussions to talk about two-spirit and gender diverse people, which also, had pushback from government. I think about I did a panel with the United Nations where we were going to talk about two-spirit and gender diverse people, but other countries didn't want to partner with us because they didn't want to have real conversations. And I think at the end of it, it's about understanding that we all carry responsibilities and conversations that affect humanity, and nuisance is about, instead of fear, because everybody deserves safety. Yes, our women deserve safety and survivors deserve to feel safe, but gender diverse people deserve safety too. And what becomes harmful is when groups of people are automatically framed as threats simply because of identity. I think about two-spirit transgender diverse people. We're not trying to, as I said before, invade spaces. We're just looking for safety for ourselves. And we need to move away from conversations that are primarily rooted in exclusion and towards, the discussions that are about dignity and that are trauma informed and actually have safety measures for everybody. Thank you.
Just want to add on to that. I think it's really unfortunate to me because I think there's so much overlap when you're talking about women's spaces and like a transcendent experience. There's so much overlap in the type of hate that we would experience or the types of risks that are out there for us. And I just wish that there was a bit more understanding and to Tyler's point, like less conversation of like what makes us so different and really looking at those intersections that like, oh, we're actually a lot more closer alike. And, I often tell people that transphobic comics and rhetorics don't just harm trans people, they're also harming cis women, right? Because cis women are not excluded from that conversation of not fitting the binary or what the patriarchy has depicted of what a woman is supposed to look like. And so it's harming both parties. But there's almost like this like mirror in between us where we're not able to actually have that real conversation that we are actually meant to be working together on this and supporting each other through this. But there's been this like divide to segregate us from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is that need for focused attention to particular issues, but often that reluctance to include folks is a lack of education, right? And this is not
100%.
allyship can play a role by informing folks and sharing resources so folks understand our communities better. We've got another question about ballroom. Ballroom is a community that might be seen as entertainment in a mainstream sense. How can the wider community and society understand the community beyond the balls, and also what supports are needed in the ballroom space?
Yeah, I think if you did a bit of research on, there's lovely, we're fortunate enough now to have lovely TV shows about it. So if you ever watch Pose or Paris is Burning, you'll see that the balls are quite actually a small part of the community space. It's actually far more about the chosen family and the resiliency that has been built through community. And so that chosen family goes so much more beyond just preparing for a competition, right? It's showing up for folks when we have people pass in the community. It's housing folks when they have a lack of access to care. One of my favorite things about ballroom is the wealth of knowledge that has trickled down from elders. You have mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters in the scene who will tell you, like, this is how I navigated my transition. This is how I navigated hate. These are the mistakes I made. Here's what you can do as somebody 10 years younger than me to not make those mistakes, to have a safer life, to have a more fruitful life. And so there's this cycle, this wealth of knowledge being passed down generation after generation. And even my chosen mom in ballroom taught me that it has to get better each generation. And that's what I carry forward with me, that, the balls aside, the kids that are in my house, if you're not in school, you cannot walk a ball. If you don't have a job, you cannot walk a ball. If you're struggling with your mental health, you cannot walk a ball, because I care about the overall well-being of my kids' health. And in terms of support that I would say ballroom needs, in the bluntest ways possible, is money. Community needs access to funding. We need access to funds to pour into folks. And that is the trajectory of what the balls do. We have these community events, you walk a category, and you're able to access the prize money. And that prize money oftentimes goes to folks' access to gender affirming care. It goes to housing. It goes to their ability to purchase food. It goes to supporting folks that have passed. And so the more that we have brands and corporations and organizations able to sponsor a ball and to sponsor these categories, that is you directly putting money back into community, right? And the lovely thing about ballroom is that it teaches discipline, it teaches hard work, it teaches determination. And so you have, these youth who are protected by some elders coming in, working hard for this, and then being rewarded, and then are able to take away that money and better themselves in the future.
And I just want to say, Jasmine, I really want to come to a ball. I
Great.
I love Legendary too and Pose, and I really think that I can come walk a body.
Oh my
Just
God,
kidding.
June 12th, there's a ball at History. It's called a hot body ball, which I think you'd be great for, so come.
I'm just kidding, but I really do want to come experience it one day.
Okay, wonderful.
Amazing. No, you should walk face for sure. Um, Thanks everyone. So Michael has one more question and then we'll wrap up. So Michael's looking for ways to respond to bullying and harassment. How do I respond to bullying and harassment?
For me, I think it's not about responding in a negative way or ourselves. I really do think about the harassment and hate that our people were taught through colonization. And when I say that, I can only speak about my experience as a two-spirit leader. I as I mentioned before, I'm very proud that my people had elected me to this position, but I can't lie to you and say that everything has been smooth sailing. I've had elders, who have grown up in the system that residential schools taught them. I was actually told it was disgusting for me to represent my community by an elder. I was told that I shouldn't be, a face that represents Ochapois because I'm not normal from an elder in front of a whole group of people. And when I say, how do we respond? The only way I can respond is in kindness and in understanding, because for me, I know that our elders were taught a certain way to believe. And I do respect, everybody's own belief systems, but we also can't allow them to speak like that. We can educate them, we can hold them accountable, and I think that we can be asking, why do you think that way? Because we want to change the system. We don't want our kids being targeted. We know that words affect people, and public humiliation can affect us over time. And we really need to take it serious that, you know, we have to be changing the way we do things. Like, for me, reconnecting to ceremony, to culture, to my language, and because belonging is so important, and it's protective, and people who um, who feel grounded in who they are to me less likely to tear other people down. And so when people see leaders, I guess, and other elders standing up against bullying and the hateful words that are being said, we start to create those inclusive environments, and it tells people we don't have to shrink themselves to be accepted. And again, I'm really of the mindset that our people deserve to feel safe in being who they are and where they are. And so it really is a balance that we have to navigate and that I try navigate, because I can't respond with hate. Hate's not gonna outweigh anything. We have to educate, be mindful, be accountable, and if it doesn't work for us, we can remove ourselves from situations to my own peace and my own I know who I am and my integrity and my values and my beliefs, and it's always to promote goodness rather than harm. And when I talk about our natural law, we have what's called Ochiniwin and Pastawin. When you break natural law, that has an effect on you. It's like our way of karma. So we have to learn to treat people with sakito and love and manachito and respect. We deserve that.
Thanks so much, Tyler. Um, we're at time already. That this conversation went by quickly, and I really, really want to thank Templeton, Tyler, and Jasmine for their vulnerability, for bringing their teachings, and their brilliance today. And so, to the audience and attendees, the conversation doesn't end here. Of course, there will be a post survey after this, and so we encourage you all to fill that out. And adding on to the response about bullying and um uh you can also and harassment, like there are lots of resources on our Rainbow Action Hub through egale.ca. We've got a Building Bridges toolkits that really talks about those intersections of identity and so please do check out those resources. So thank you everybody for your time and for your attention and your commitments to a safer future for 2S LGBTQI communities. Thank you very much and have a wonderful afternoon.